Welcome to your classroom coffee break. I'm John Van Dusen, long-term teacher, coach, and Army officer, and today we're going to talk about how to be flexible when lesson planning and how to adapt on the fly. Now, if you've been teaching longer than about 3 days, you have been there where you walk in the classroom, you've got a great lesson planned, and the projector doesn't work, or there's a fire drill, or something has been going on in the school and the students are talking about anything other than what you have planned. So today we're going to talk about how to remain flexible, keep students engaged, and save your lesson plan. So first we're going to talk about the importance of remaining flexible. And in the Army, we have a saying that no plan survives first contact, which means you can have the perfect plan on paper, but as soon as you drive down the road and get engaged by the enemy, you have to adjust your plan, obviously, to deal with the enemy. So we're not talking about enemy in this case, but we are talking about different distractions that can happen. So you are on your way to delivering your lesson and there is a fire drill or the phone rings and a student gets called out. A real common one is technology decides to be on the fritz or decides not to work. Just the other day I had a booklet planned for reviewing the War of 1812 and the booklet website was down and it just didn't work. Another thing that can happen is some of the websites that you want to use might be blocked by your admin or your technology team. And I've had that happen before where even it was a website that I've used in the past, but because of new updates or new firewalls or other kinds of techie things I don't know about, those websites were then blocked. So now I have a bunch of students waiting on a website they can't use. So you have to remain flexible because those things are absolutely going to happen to you. And it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how often. So the first benefit of being flexible and being able to adjust on the fly is it's going to keep your students engaged. If you were to take 10 minutes to try to fix your technology problem or do something else in order to try to stick with your plan, you're going to do two things. One, you're going to lose engagement of your students. They're going to lose interest in whatever it is that you were supposed to be talking about, and they're going to find something else to do with their mind. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to sabotage yourself, because if you take an extra 10 minutes for something you had planned, that's 10 minutes that you're going to steal from the back end of that project or that lesson plan that you're just not going to get back, because unless you're teaching the elementary grades, your middle school and high school students need to move on to the next class. So you have to remain flexible, if only to keep the students engaged. The other thing it's going to do is it's going to help reduce your own stress. If you're the type of teacher that has to have a rigid lesson plan, you're going to be stressed out when those things happen that cause your plan to get off track. So by remaining flexible and having these different strategies in place to adapt your plans, you're going to help reduce your own stress. And lastly, but maybe most important, is the modeling aspect to your students. If you can remain flexible and save those lesson plans from those disasters that happen along the way, you are demonstrating not only problem solving skills to your student, like, hey, my teacher actually just kind of figured this out. We were supposed to do one thing, we ended up doing something else. But you're also going to show them that you can use your emotional intelligence, understand what's happening, remain calm, and continue on with the day. A little saying I have in my head: if the projector goes out or if a website isn't working, I say to myself, well, if this is the worst thing that happens to me all day, will be just fine. And that may seem a little invalidating, because the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you. But it's also a small reality check. Is it the worst thing in the world if my students don't get to do this little project I had planned for them today? It's not. We can figure it out and do it tomorrow. So I've already mentioned some of these, but common scenarios that require some flexibility. The biggest one, I think, is going to be technology failures. I mentioned the website that wasn't work, even though it worked the year before, the Blooket website that was down, the projector's not working. So if this happens to you, depending on what the technology problem is, you might be able to have a quick fix with a technology person, or just resetting whatever's not working. And while that's happening, you can have your students do a small group discussion or stand up, pair up with another student and talk about the topic while you try to take that 2 or 3 minutes and fix it. But if it's more catastrophic than that and you're not able to fix it right away, then you need to have a backup plan. And my common backup plan is simply, we're doing whatever we're going to do on the board, we're going to do on the whiteboard. So we get the whiteboard markers out. If it was supposed to be something on the computer, we take out our notebooks and we just do it with a pencil, a pen, a whiteboard marker, and we just go about it that way. And even though we might not be able to do some of the cooler things that we're going to do with that project, we still do get engagement and we still get learning done. So another common scenario where it requires flexibility is when you read the room and you see that your students are just not engaged. And it could be because they're up last night late because there was a great Monday night football game on. It could be something that happened at lunchtime that everybody is talking about. And a couple different ways you can deal with that, depending on what it is just stop the learning for a minute and be some humans. Be some humans and talk about like, hey, what is going on? And I talk about the elephant in the room. If there was an elephant sitting in your classroom, you wouldn't try to teach around it. You would address and say, hey, we have an elephant in the room. So if there was some massive issue that happened at lunchtime, if somebody got in trouble, if there was a fight, if something happened the night before, just take a few minutes and address it and talk about it. And after you are humans and have those conversations, again, age level appropriate, then you can move on with the lesson. And you might not get as much engagement as you want, but you're going to get more than if you just try to plow right through your lesson without addressing the elephant in the room. Another thing you can do, I see this especially right after lunch, is you'll get sleepy heads where students are full and then they went and ran around, so they're tired. So the best thing they could do for themselves is take a nap. So I'd like to have students stand up, go meet with a partner, go meet with a different group of 3 and talk about what we're doing. Because I know if we can get our bodies moving, that's going to get the brain moving back to our brain and out of our bellies. Another common scenario that requires flexibility is what we'll call scheduled disruptions. And this could be a fire drill is probably the most common, or a lockdown drill, a tornado drill, something that's going to disrupt your class, probably right in the middle of it, take you away for 8 to 10 minutes and then bring you back. And now you have to try to re-engage those students with what you were doing before. So when I know we're going to have a scheduled disruption, I look at the lesson and I see what are the must-haves and what are the nice-to-haves. So every class has to get the must-haves, whatever the 3 or 4 key critical content points are that they need to know about this lesson. I make sure those are completed. And for the classes that get that extra time that didn't have the fire drill, they might get some of those nice-to-haves, those extra little anecdotal stories, or maybe another short video that the other class simply didn't get to watch. But you can make that up too with, if you're using like Google Classroom or one of those, where you can post and say, hey, I know we had a fire drill today, but here's another 3-minute video that we're going to watch that we didn't have time to. So you can still get your students engaged with the need to haves and then have the nice to haves available to them. And then the last scenario that requires flexibility is just simply the differentiation of needs. So you might have one class that's very high academically and one class that is lower academically. If you're in the middle or high school, you're probably going to figure that out fairly quickly within the first week or two, which classes seem to need a little bit more time with concepts and which classes kind of pick it up faster than others. So with that, I go back to that nice to have and need to have. There's certain pieces of critical content that every 8th grader in my class has to have no matter what, no matter how much time it takes, we have to get these concepts down. And for the classes that are struggling, maybe that's all they get for that particular day. But for the classes that pick it up faster and they're really moving along and participating well, maybe they get a little extra with nice to haves. The one thing I don't like to do is I don't like to give extra work to classes who are doing better, and I don't like to give extra work to classes that need a little bit more help. I don't think the extra work motivates or punishes in the way that we think it does, and I would much rather use some type of engagement strategy where the students are up and moving, maybe they're drawing, maybe they're talking with another small group about the topic at hand instead of simply giving them more work. All right, so how do you do it? What are some strategies for adapting those lesson plans on the fly? And I will tell you that even though you say it's on the fly, as you get deeper into this profession, you will actually start planning with flexibility in mind. And something I use, I call it slush time. And basically all this is it's time that can be adjusted based on whatever is happening. So let's say we're working on a project. One class might get 12 minutes at the end of the class period to work on this project, but because it's slush time, maybe another class gets 20 minutes to work on this certain project. And I know that third hour is really high academically, but they're also going to have a fire drill. They're only going to have 3 minutes to get started on their project. but I understand that third hour is going to be able to catch themselves up the next day, even though that they kind of fell behind on day one. So as you're planning your projects and as you're planning out your lessons, you can build in a little bit of slush time around your lesson. An easy way, like I just mentioned, is at the end, but you can also do it near the beginning. If you have students reviewing, maybe they're sharing their work from the day before, you can adjust that time to fit your needs. So maybe one class only gets 3 minutes to review with their table, where the next class you have them stand up and meet with 3 different people, and it actually takes you 8 to 10 minutes. So that 5 to 6 minute difference that you built in with your slush time, you can easily adjust that throughout the day, throughout the classes, to keep everybody on the same page. Another strategy for being able to adapt on the fly is to have kind of a grab and go kit. And this might be something like lateral thinking puzzles or crosswords, or something where if a class gets way far ahead, you can grab this and they're still getting academic learning, but maybe it's different than what other students are going to get. An example of this would be during the NWEA testing. We have our first and second hour and our sixth and seventh hour. That's when the testing takes place. Well, third hour seems to never miss a class period. So to keep third hour from getting too far ahead, they might get some more of those nice to haves where the other classes don't get to do a small little project with the lateral thinking puzzles or the Kahoots or the Blooket. Another thing I've done is I've used that extra hour with those students who didn't miss because of NWA. I've had them make, say, quiz trade cards. I've had them make game boards. I've had them make flashcards that can be used by the entire 8th grade. So while first and second and sixth and seventh hour are kind of stuck in testing, that third hour is actually helping those other classes out, but they're also engaging themselves by making those quiz trade cards or those flashcards or those game boards. So it really comes down to not just planning out the lesson, but planning out the day, the week, and looking more at the big picture of what's going on inside your classroom. And the last thing I'll end with in this episode is I'm going to ask that you try new things and embrace mistakes. It's going to do a couple things for you. One, you might find a really great way to remain flexible, adaptable, and do something new, which will be awesome, not just for the students that you first try it with, but for the rest of your students that you have the rest of your career. The second thing it's going to do is it's actually going to model for your students it's okay. It's okay to try new things, and it's okay for it to not work. It's okay to fail once in a while, as long as you learn from it. And I did an episode on prepare to fail, which I'll post down in the show notes, where it really reflects on my time as a STEM teacher. And basically everything we did was to failure. Whether we were building bridges or building towers, we would do it until those structures failed, and then we'd figure out how to do better from there. And you also have to be okay with it never working. I remember when I was a younger teacher, I was really trying to get my students to be able to do a message board, something that's pretty common now on like a Google Classroom type platform. And I found some different message boards. I found them for free. I had them set up, but what I ran into was I had 6th graders, and in order to sign up for these accounts, you had to be 13 years old. Not all my 6th graders were 13-year-olds. So I could have easily just kind of fudged the rules and told them to, hey, everybody's birthday right now is 1990, and just kind of let it slide and got them on the message board. But that wouldn't have been the right thing to do. In my poor class that year, I bet I had them try 6, 7, 10 different things to try to get them on these message boards, and it just never worked. And I'm okay with that now because, one, the worst thing that ever happened to me that day was the message board didn't work. So I was having a pretty good day. But 2, and I'll post it in the show notes, I was modeling for them ethical decision making. And yes, it would have been really easy to just kind of fib a little bit and get them on the message board, even though they were underage. But at what cost? Not only would I have been violating a law by having my students do that, I assume I'd be violating the law, but also I would be modeling to them that it's okay to lie just a little bit to get what you want. And I was not okay with that then, and I'm not okay with that now. So in the end, I'm glad that message board thing didn't work because it taught me some valuable lessons as well as my students. So I will tell you this, flexible lesson planning is a skill and will take time to develop. If you're a first, second, or third year teacher, you are probably just trying to tread water to keep your head above. So just a final thought is flexible lesson planning is a skill that takes time. So You're going to be frustrated your first few years of teaching, but trust me, you will get better. It just takes a little time to develop. It's also essential for creating a dynamic and responsive classroom where your students are engaged, and you're going to have things that go wrong. Your students won't even know because you'll be so good at just shifting around on the fly and keeping them engaged and doing things to fix whatever broke. And lastly, it's not about having the perfect plan. It's about what you do when something happens to that plan. No plan survives first contact, but it is up to you to make sure your classroom continues on. So if you got any value out of this episode, I ask that you like, subscribe, share with your friends so they can make the next classroom coffee break.